Hi, good morning. My name is Paulo Sotero. I'm the director of the Brazil Institute here at the Wilson Center. It's a great pleasure to greet you here this morning to for a discussion on the road to next year's presidential election in Brazil. As you know, Brazil is facing what I think has been described as the most serious crisis of its history, both economically, politically, morally. And we are very glad that we have here with us three close friends of the Brazil Institute, two former scholars of the Wilson Center, uh, who were here for this ceremony we had yesterday evening to honor President Fernando Henrique Cardoso, one of the founding fathers of the Latin American program and the founding father of the Brazil Institute, to discuss this very complex issue, the challenge that Brazil faces. We have with us Percio Arida. Percio Arida was a scholar at the Wilson Center in 1984 after he finished his PhD at MIT. And while here, the 5 months he spent here, he wrote a seminal paper that was the basis for the HEL plan about a transition currency that would help stabilize the economy. That started a 10-year discussion on his proposal that was enriched by contributions from others and, well, became the basis of the Real Plan, the most successful stabilization program, economic program uh, in Latin America, certainly in Brazil. The currency, Real, is still there. And so we are very honored to have Percio back. I think it's the first time he comes back to the Wilson Center since that time. It's very important also because after having a career in the financial sector, he is now back in academia. He is at the School of Government at Oxford University. So it's a great satisfaction, great honor to have you here, Percio. Welcome back. We have also Carlos Eduardo Lins da Silva, who was a scholar here in the 80s, I think a little bit after Percio.
87, 88.
And well, was my competitor as a journalist, but we managed to protect our friendship. And Carlos is a vital part today of the Brazil Institute. He is the editor of Política Externa, a foreign policy journal in Brazil. He's a professor, visiting professor at the Institute of International Relations at the University of São Paulo, and he is also a senior advisor at FAPESP, the São Paulo Research Foundation. We were just together in Lubbock, Texas, and in Lincoln, Nebraska, doing the 7th annual FAPESP Week, which features Brazilian scientists and scholars that do collaborate, do joint work with their American colleagues. We spent a week in those two places where they uh, uh, presented the result of their work. So there is more to the Brazil-U.S. relations than you see or than you see when you talk to, for instance, diplomats on both sides. There is a very substantive dialogue going on, and a very consequential dialogue going on. So Carlos is always, an advisor to us here, a supporter of this institute, and it's a great pleasure, Carlos, that you can join us. Last but not least, Sergio Fausto, who is a very close personal friend of mine. We go back a long way. And he is the executive director of the Fundação Fernando Henrique Cardoso. He works directly with President Fernando Henrique Cardoso. He has been in government. He is a very influential public intellectual in São Paulo, and we thought that the three of them could help us understand what is obviously a very complex situation in Brazil. I am going to stop here and offer the floor to first Percio, then Sergio, then Carlos, and then we are going to have a discussion, and we are eager to listen to you also to share your opinions, or perspective. We should have more people coming because we had more than 75 RSVPs, but this is Friday, right? So it's always, and I wanted to recognize one person also that I think as Ricardo Santiago, who is was Deputy Minister of Planning in Brazil, a very senior director at the Inter-American Development Bank for many years, both here in Paris, back in Washington, and it's very nice to have friends like Ricardo, who did so much, for Brazil as a public official to participate. Welcome, Ricardo. Percio, if you could start us off.
Thank you very much, Paulo, for your kind words. Good morning, everybody. Yesterday we celebrated the 40 years of the Latin American program that was actually founded in 1977. And the program had actually three fathers, so to say. Two of them were honorees of last dinner, Abraham Lowenthal and our former president, Fernando Henrique Cardoso. And the third one had unfortunately already passed away, was Albert Hirschman. I'll start with a personal story, but you understand why. I was assistant to Hirschman in 78, 79 in Princeton at the Institute for Advanced Study there. I had just finished my general exams for MIT. I applied for the job of assistant to Albert Hirschman. I was selected, and I was never interviewed by him. I just, you apply, give your references, a personal statement, etc. And then I moved to Princeton, from Cambridge to Princeton. And at my very first day I got there, a bit intimidated by this legend of economics and economic development. Actually, there's a very, very good biography published recently describing his life. And kind of intimidated. It's a large room, large office. And there was a paper on top of his desk called, in Spanish, called The Collapse of the Model of Import Substitution in Latin America. The title in Spanish was even more dramatic. It's like el agotamiento, so it's the exhaustion of the model of import substitution in Latin America. And he asked me, have you read it? Of course, I had never heard of the paper. I was a bit ashamed, perhaps something important that I missed. That's not a good start, right? The very first day. And I said, no, I'm sorry. Is it good? And he said, well, I have not read it, but I don't like it. I kind of surprised. Why, professor, don't like it? He said, you know what, in social life, every time you see something collapsing, be aware that the new trends are emerging. So if the analysts focus on what's collapsing, that's the obvious thing, because you just realize what is collapsing. You don't pay attention. You're naturally attracted to the collapse, because that's the most visible part. But the invisible one, the one that scholars should always ask for, and where's the new? What is emerging? Right? That's a kind of dialectic framework of approach of a social life. And I think it's a proper remark. Look at what happened to Brazil and what's happening now. Right? On the one hand, what happened to Brazil is very much standard. You had a populist government with a charismatic leader that appeals directly to the masses of people, but the very poor, with a rhetoric saying that he's establishing the new, the novelty. I remember Lula had this catchphrase. Never before in the history of this country, and then he would continue, right? That's a catchphrase. But you had the same thing all over Latin America, right? Hugo Chavez talked about the Bolivarian Revolution, that would be something new. Allende talked about this socialism in Chile and the start of a new era. Perón talked about the start of a new era, and so on and so forth. And economic policy of populist governments tend to be remarkably similar. They start well because they expand fiscal expenditure, they increase the salaries of people regardless of productivity gains. Probably usually they enjoy a good moment in the market of commodities globally, and unemployment goes down, activity picks up, and you have, let's say, a glorious paradise phase to start with. Later on, the economy overheats, markets become increasingly suspicious there's something wrong. The government tries to intervene heavily in markets to control market forces that are not behaving properly. That's basically the argument. And you have the usual story. You control gasoline prices, you freeze a number of tariffs, you intervene heavily in the exchange rate to avoid exchange rate depreciation by administrative means. You change the calculation of price indexes, and you try by a number of forms to prevent prices to go up. You put interest rates at very low levels, and obviously there's an overheated demand for credit that you try to control. Basically, the economy starts to lose efficiency along the process, and the working of the relative price system becomes clearly impaired along the way. And the government escalates in the number of interventions, always believing that the elites are not behaving properly, are not supporting the regime, and are undermining, so to say, a new populist leader, etc. It comes a moment in which it becomes impossible to keep it under control. The exchange rate moves abruptly up, either in official markets and black markets. Inflation becomes even repressed. You can see secondary prices, etc., of all sorts moving up. Private sector investment collapses, and suddenly the whole thing becomes more and more untenable, gets to a point that there's a reversal, and then a new government and with liberal economic policies comes in. Prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall, the process typically associated with a military coup. And for one reason, socialist leaders of all inclinations, populist leaders, all like Cuba. That's a universal phenomenon, right? Even Lula likes Cuba, Dilma likes Cuba. It's a universal phenomenon. And so you had an overtone of, let's say, associated with populism with the trends in the Cold War global regime that sustained international relations from 1945 up to the fall of the Berlin Wall. You had a military coup in Chile, you had a military coup in Argentina, you had a military coup in Brazil in 1964. All of them ending, let's say, populist regimes and starting liberal reforms so to say, after the military sponsorships, right? Which created another set of problems of their own later on. But after the fall of the Berlin Wall, even if socialist leaders like Cuba, who cares, right? It doesn't matter, right? So the United States don't care. There's no real threat of communism coming from the associated with Cuba. And the military will not intervene. So the only way that a populist government gets done and populist leader out of power is by elections. Either you elect a non-populist liberal leader, or you don't. If you don't, the thing continues. That's the usual story. You're having that's the end of the populist regime in Argentina, happened when Macri was elected. That's a more, let's say, the natural course of history. In Venezuela, for a number of reasons, the opposition could not elect, let's say, a liberal leader. And what happened? Populism continues, and we all know what's going on with the country. So it's definitely worse than a war, right? The destruction that's caused by populist regimes. You have one exception in Peru, a remarkable one, that Alan Garcia was the very populist leader. He lost the election, and then he converted, it's a kind of religious conversion, right, to liberalism, and became the most liberal political leader in Latin America by far. Was elected again, and said, you know what, this time I'm not going to do the mistakes I did the first time. That's kind of a unique thing. Right? And Peru is actually the economy that's growing the fastest in Latin America, right? And continued the liberal tradition since then, including with Pedro Paulo Kuczynski. Now, what happened in Brazil is the usual story, but it's not. It's everything that happened in Lula Dilma is the usual story of populism cycles in Latin America. Right? You would expect things to be reverted in an election. That did not happen in 2014. You would expect it to happen in 2018. What's new in Brazil is, first of all, you had an impeachment. Right? It's an impeachment technically correct if you have the patience to go through the long report of the specialized courts taking care of public finance. You see clearly there was a violation of the fiscal responsibility law. That's crystal clear. But obviously Dilma was impeached. No one knows what the violation is. You need to be a specialist in public finance to understand the arguments. And she was taken out of power just because people couldn't stand her. As simple as that. Right? And you had two groups of guys in power, the PT guys, the PMDB guys. It turned out the vice president was from PMDB. He was there. And there comes something strange, because as against continuing or even escalating what you would expect from a populist regime, they may decide to do a 180 degrees turn in the economy. Right? It was a smart decision because he thought, listen, here I am, became president by accident. I don't have popularity of my own. The only way to continue in power or to be successful is not convincing people that I'm great. There's no way I can do it. Is not pursuing further populist policies because obviously they led the country into a disastrous situation in public finance, but actually to implement liberal policies. Right? And the way he established the cabinet to start with was actually a way, listen, for that I need to do some constitutional reforms, and I will structure my cabinet in such a way as to have enough command of both houses and pass constitutional reforms. What he did is something surprising, right? Because actually he changed management of state companies to the better, and radically to the better. Take the case of Petrobras. Petrobras is the largest corporation in Brazil, is the largest issuer of Eurobonds in the whole world, was subject to the largest scandal of corruption in Western democracies. Of course, in dictatorial regimes, you don't know, right? But in Western democracies, by far, Brazil and Petrobras are the champions, right? The company was actually at the verge of collapse. Bonds of Petrobras traded at, obviously, secondary markets, right? Because if Petrobras were to issue a bond, no one would buy it. Right? Secondary markets at dollar plus 14 per year, long-term bonds. The deterioration of credit risk of Petrobras was so dramatic that because there's an implicit guarantee by the Treasury that contaminated the whole yield curve for the Treasury. So actually deterioration risk of Petrobras provoked deterioration of risk of Brazil as a whole. People said that the Treasury would have to do a capital increase of 100 billion to solve the problem. What Temer did, appoint a good guy there, was actually a chief of staff of Fernando Henrique Cardoso, the one who dealt with the shortage for electrical supply during Fernando Henrique Cardoso, very capable person that had a successful career in the public sector and the private sector as well. He was the president of Bunge, the Argentinian trade company in Brazil, and said, you know what, do whatever you want. I'm not going to interfere, but solve this problem. Surprisingly, the problem was solved. And the credit risk of Petrobras went back from 14 to lower than 6. Petrobras a good credit now, solved the problem. Dilma and Lula never liked privatizations, of course, because that's typical of let's say, of populist menu, that you should go for more state, not less state. Right? What Temer did, well, let me start new concessions for key areas of electric sector, oil and gas, and let me move as soon as I can towards privatization. We had auctions of last week, which is surprisingly successful, strong interest of foreigners to invest long-term in Brazilian infrastructure. Then they announced a smart privatization of Eletrobras, the big giant of the electric sector. Smart because done through transforming Eletrobras in a corporation by actually issuing new shares, and the treasury are not going to subscribe to new shares, which is something no one would ever expect to happen. Right? He changed the central bank, governor central bank, for someone, again, PhD from economics at MIT, long associated with Itaú for long, private sector, Elon. And you know what? Inflation that was above 10% now is going towards 3% per year. And interest rates are going to go to 7% per year, or probably lower, right? Which we would never expect. But this happened in 1 year. Right? It's a dramatic reversal of the economic crisis that surprised most analysts. Didn't surprise me. I was very fond of, very strong supporter of Temer economic policy, not politics, but economic policies from the very beginning. It was definitely helped by the international scene. We have an excess liquidity globally. One of those situations that markets become very brave. They don't see risks. You know it's going to end badly because something else is going to come. But to the moment it comes, it always does. But up to the moment you have a kind of black swan phenomenon, markets will continue to be very favorable, not only Brazil, to all of the emerging market economies. So there was, I said, the alignment of stars, right? He did a radical change in economic policy in Brazil, and he got very nice and favorable international environment. Well, he was also very surprisingly smart in approving constitutional reforms. He's a good politician. No one can deny that. And he approved the constitutional reform, established a ceiling on government expenditure in real terms. That would last, it depends on what is contingent number of events, but at least for 10 years, right? I'm not even sure if that's good, right? Because you are kind of put yourself, let's say, a constraint for 10 years. Who knows what will happen in 10 years? But given the path of uncontrollable government expenditure that we have had since Lula came into power, that's clearly a fresh start, right? It's much easier to relax than the other way. He approved the constitutional reform establishing a ceiling on total government expenditure faster than Fernando Henrique, with all the popularity of being a newly elected president, a real program. At a shorter period of time, then Fernando Henrique succeeded in breaking the state monopoly of oil, right? Which shows that how remarkably connected with the Senate and the chamber he is for non-elected president with low popularity. Right? We approved, let's say, a labor reform, which is a very welcome one. It's as good as you can get, short of a change in the constitution. That will certainly improve matters in Brazil. Everything that happened in 1 year in a few months. Right? So it's a dramatic reversal. And what's unique compared to Latin America is that it was a reverse of populist policies was not caused by an election, associated with election like Argentina, not associated with a military coup, not associated with the, let's say, conversion of a newly elected president to liberal ideas like in Peru. It was through an impeachment, which is a completely unforeseen consequence of an impeachment. And he would have approved a social security reform, which is extremely hard to approve anywhere. Obviously, he was hit by this Joesley latest scandal, of which I can comment later, but it's not the subject of my talk now here. And actually, probably is not going to pass. But at least they changed the quality of the debate. Right? So one can only applaud what Temer has done. He has done it to his own, let's say, to his own benefit, of course. It's a smart political calculation, but whatever the calculation is, the end result is good, right, from the economic viewpoint. The economy has stagnated now, which is very good news. The economy was falling 3% per year. Right? If you look at current levels of per capita income in Brazil, they have receded back to the levels of 10 years ago. Right? So that gives us a sense of the crisis. Right? Unemployment is still very high. But the economy, the fact that the economy stagnated is great. Right? It's great news. And not only that, you're having obviously a cyclical recovery. Economies never disappear, and cycles exist always. Right? So you have a cyclical recovery. You have confidence that, let's say, someone able to pursue even further the reforms will be elected in 2018, an international environment. And in all probability, the economy starts growing next year. You need to grow in excess of, let's say, 1.5%, 2%, in order to start absorbing the existing unemployed people. And basically because the labor force in Brazil grows 0.7% per year. So if you to keep unemployment stable, you need to grow 1.5, give elasticity, et cetera, to absorb the new entrants to the market. The economy will probably grow more than that, more than 1.5 next year. So we're going to see a slight decline in unemployment. The question is, what could go wrong? I'll say two things can go wrong. A black swan in international markets. Maybe Trump with North Korea, who knows? Right? You never know, but it may happen. Or the 2018 elections. Bearing an external shock, adverse external shock, if you have someone elected who is committed to pursuing the reforms 2018, the future for the next years in Brazil is extremely bright. And I know I sound perhaps over-optimistic, or say, but to you, but it's very hard to see why the economy would not grow very fast with low inflation next year, which kind of is a hard combination to achieve. Right? You have excess labor in job markets, have excess capacity. Brazil is big and diversified. It can attract a lot of foreign capital. What you're seeing is just the beginning, right? But everything, let's say, barring external events, depends on electing the right guy 2018. So far, markets are, international and domestic markets, are convinced that will be the case, that Lula will be dead, that no one from the left could ever possibly come, that the election is going to be either Doria or Alckmin will be elected. Both of them have very strong, let's say, promise of reforms. Doria is new to the politics, but has has been very popular because he knows how to use social media. He's advocating a very anti-PT and anti-left um, policies. He's something new. Brazil has always been, there's a funny expression by Gilberto Gil, who says, geleia geral. I'm not sure how to. So in a sense that a country that people avoid extremes, people avoided taking very hard views on something. Everybody was centered to the left. That's it. You would be ashamed of having, let's say, what we would be, let's say, in the English sense, UK sense, a conservative, right? That would be ashamed to be. Dori is something new. He was elected the conservative in the UK sense platform, and he said, I'm going to privatize everything. I'm going to eradicate populism for good in Brazil. It's a very radical, but he was elected, right? So that tells you that something new may happen, right? Alckmin is well perceived by markets as well. He's obviously much a shy and discreet personality. Very hard to find a politician whose son dies in tragic circumstances, and the guy kept the funeral ceremony entirely private, right? So instead of exploring it politically, etc. So it's a very reserved personality. But what he has done from the viewpoint of management of State of São Paulo is unique. Right? All of the public sector innovations, electronics, auctions for buying goods, everything that you can imagine, social security, everything has been introduced in São Paulo before other states, and in São Paulo before the union. Right? São Paulo has never failed to comply with the fiscal responsibility law. São Paulo has never delayed payments to suppliers or public servants. So you have very good track record of management. So markets look at either Dori or Alckmin and say, you know what? One of them will be elected, and we will be very, very fine next year, 2018. Right? I'm not an expert in elections. I'm just saying that that's what market expectation is. But obviously, Carlos Eduardo and my colleagues here understand much better about politics and general trends of society than I do. So, please.
Sergio, so the economy looks fine.
And my microphone is on, or you can hear me?
Sir.
All right.
So, what is the picture on the political side looking into this next?
Well, the picture from the standpoint of a political analyst is much less rosier than the one who has been favored by the market. This is my main argument here, that I don't buy into this optimism of the market, which I think is based on a very mechanicistic reading of the political dynamics that are being played out in Brazil. The basic, Pécio presented it in a very sophisticated way, but the market, between inverted commas, the prevailing thought in the market expectation is that since you're having cyclical recovery of the economy, a centrist candidate will emerge, God only knows how, right? And will reap the benefits of the cyclical economic recovery. I take issue with this reading of the situation. First, I think it should be considered that the labor market will be the last one to be affected by this recovery of the economy. So in terms of purchasing power and employment and income of the bulk of the population, this recovery will take longer to be felt, right? And it's, of course, economic recovery is good news for centrist candidates, right? But you cannot derive or a political outcome from this economic trend. We are living under extraordinary circumstances in Brazil. The prevalent mood in the market is very different from the prevalent mood in the population. There is a lot of anger. There is a lot of anti-establishment sentiment. These are the prevailing sentiment in the Brazilian electorate. This is clearly shown by the polls. I've just saw a poll yesterday conducted by Ipsos in partnership with the Eurasia Group. And one of the questions were, what is your prevailing sentiment in relation to the country? So if you add up anger with concern, those two categories, they account for almost 80% of all answers in that poll. Optimism is down to, let's say, 10%. It's residual. That can change with the economy picking up. Of course, that can change, but it will change slowly, in my view, right? The contrast with Argentina, I think it's illuminating. The Macri consolidated its candidacy as an oppositional force to Cristina Kirchner without being tainted by the scandals and the crisis that led to the collapse of Kirchnerismo. The situation in Brazil is completely different because all forces are sort of maxed up in the same mass, right? And centrist parties, the PMDB and the PSDB, are badly hit by the unpopularity of Temer's government. It's incredible how bad is the perception of the population with regards to the PSDB. And we have to reckon to that fact. And so I think it's a little bit naive that to believe, as the market does, that, well, it's almost a sure thing. It will be either Doria but why? Why? It's such a mechanicistic interpretation of Brazilian reality that I'm almost stunned that people believe in that. A lot of things that we still don't know. There will be new shock waves coming from Lava Jato. Who will be hit? Well, I think the PSDB and PMDB will be hit. I mean, there are no good news in the pipeline for centrist parties in Brazil coming from Lava Jato. It would be nice. That will matter a lot, right? Will Lula run? Will he be allowed to run? I don't think so. Right? In this scenario, where his votes will go, this is a big interrogation mark. Who is better positioned to benefit from these votes? I think it will be a sort of wild guess. He's firmly rooted in the poor segments of society, and especially in the Northeast. Do the centrist candidates, those that we know are eager to be in the race, well positioned to get these votes? I don't think so. I think it's complicated. At least it's a big challenge for them. Doria and Alckmin get most of their votes in the higher income brackets of Brazilian society. And I'm sorry, but I think the markets don't get Brazilian society very well. And too disconnected to what is the average sentiment of the Brazilian society. So I'll leave it here with this, sharing with you this my my view and my instincts that the election is wide open. I'm really worried and with the emergence of a far right candidate like Bolsonaro, who is gaining ground, being kind of normalized by the middle class. It's incredible how the have middle classes have shifted to the right because fear of public safety or lack thereof is in no times high. There is this, especially among middle class people, this sort of all-out rejection of politics. Let's done away with them all. And so here's a real thing. How far he can go, I don't think he will be able to be a competitive candidate in the second round, provided you have a competitive candidate that comes from the center of the political spectrum. On the left, with the absence of Lula, I think, well, many people will try their luck. And maybe the centrist parties will have to resort to someone who are not already in the cards. Will that be good news? Someone from the entertaining industry as a sort of last resort, not to be defeated in a very competitive election. I don't think this bodes well to Brazil, right? So I'm much less optimistic, much more concerned than Percio is in this respect. I'll leave it here.
Well, Carlos, you have to solve this for us.
Sure.
Because here, the other game, you're a friend of both of them. Please settle.
Easy task.
Please settle this difference.
Very easy task. Well, I'll be in the mid ground, of course, as a good
Good
toucan.
journalist should be.
I think Percio has offered us a brilliant analysis of what's going on in the economy in Brazil. It's amazing that a so unpopular president has achieved so much what popular Lula and popular Cardoso couldn't, what shows how well he controls the Congress. It's really incredible that a man whose approval rate now is lower than inflation and interest rates, it's 3% according to the latest poll, can have achieved what he did in so little time and being indicted twice and having been tried by the electoral court once. So in the very short time of his term, 3 times he has been had his mandate questioned legally, and even though he did what he did. But I also think that Sergio offered us a very realistic approach of what is the feeling of the population. I will not dare to make predictions about elections. After what happened in the United States last year, when I suffered my most shameful defeat as an analyst, for the first time in my life, I wrote with all letters who would win the election, and I was wrong. So I will not do this mistake again, never in my life. But I would say that although we don't have any front-runner, clear front-runner, I think we have 4 blocks of voters that can be very well identified. First, and I think that is the largest one, those who will not vote, either by not going into the polls. You know that in Brazil, the vote is compulsory, but it's very easy not voting. So many people will not vote. And those who will vote, but will either nullify or vote blank. I think that this block of voters may comprise 35, 40%. You see, we had an extra election in Amazonas a couple of weeks ago. Amazonas is always a state where everybody votes and votes for a candidate, and 40% of the voters didn't vote or voted blank or nullified. The winner and the runner-off had less votes than those who didn't vote. So this is a big bunch of people who will not participate in the process. Then you have the populist side, which I think will have, if Lula runs 30% of the vote in the first round, 35% of the vote, and if Lula does not run, whoever is his successor will get, I think, some 20% of the vote, 15, 20% of the vote. Lula will run or not, we don't know. Sergio guesses he won't, but it's on the hands first of the Superior Court, who will judge his appeal, and I think his appeal will be denied, but then on the hands of the Supreme Court, because what our judge who talked to us yesterday told us is very worrisome. The Supreme Court may revert its decision that people can be definitely convicted and imprisoned after his first appeal is denied. So if this happens, Lula will be free to run. And there are other, there are other ways that I'm not going into because it's too many details that not the case right now. He may run, he may not run. And then we have the center right with at least 3 candidates that appear now. Doria, Alckmin, that Persil has mentioned, both are from the same party. So either Doria will betray Alckmin, his godfather, and this will cost him some votes and popularity, or one of them will not be the candidate. I don't think Alckmin will change parties. Doria may change parties. But anyway, it's not so easy for one who has just been elected mayor, first time he was running for public office. He was the godson of the governor. He was nobody. Nobody in the PSDB wanted him to be the mayor candidate for the party. Only Alckmin. Alckmin put all his eggs on the basket of Doria. And now, 9 months later, 1 year later, he resigns from the post he was elected to, and he betrays the governor. And that's not good politics, but anyway, it may happen. But I agree, Doria is the most appealing candidate right now. And we have Meirelles. If the economy really does well, as Persil thinks it will, Meirelles will become a good candidate despite of himself. He is the most boring person I have ever met. But who knows? Perhaps he will do something. And then there is the outsider. And there, I think, resides the biggest danger. I think that many Brazilians want someone who has never done politics at all, the big outsider, more or less like Mr. Trump was able to portray himself as one of those. And then we have the possibility of former Chief Justice Joaquim Barbosa be this outsider. I think this is a real danger. He's an authoritarian personality, and he is not a good politician at all. And then we have, as Sergio mentioned, the entertainment industry possibility, who would be Luciano Huck, host of a television variety show, who has many, many, many fans. My mother, for instance, 91-year-old, she calls me every Saturday to tell me what wonderful things Luciano had done for the poor that specific Saturday. And she always ends our conversation saying, it would be so good if he were the president of Brazil. And I say, okay, mother, okay. But anyway, it's a real possibility. I think that Luciano Huck would have an impressive vote, and that could be tragic as well. So I hope Persil is right, and Alckmin or Meirelles or Doria or whoever wins the election. I don't think Bolsonaro has any chance. As Paulo Sotero has already said, Brazil is not a country that has ever voted for extremists, either on the right or on the left. Don't think it will be an exception this year, but we are running many risks that the 2018 election doesn't turn out as good as we hope, we deserve, and we need.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we agree on two things. I think the assessment by Percio that the economy will be recovering next week. We don't know year. We don't know if it's 2% or 3%. There are optimistic people saying that the economy will grow 3% next year. There is the other thing. Well, Carlos doesn't seem to agree totally with that. What happens with Lula? We were discussing this before. Lula, the vote, the reinterpretation of the second conviction or the consequences of the second conviction by the Supreme Court, I think refers to serving or not starting serving time, jail time. It does not affect the candidacy, the eligibility, because he would have be then found guilty of violation of the law of
Clean slate
ficha
law,
limpa, the ficha limpa. So most likely, in that regard, Lula is not going to be in the ballot. There are other people in Brazil that believe also that Lula, having been this enormously popular figure in Brazil, would probably prefer not to expose himself in that way because he calculates that it's probably the probability of a successful ending kind of low. So you protect your historic position in the country, etc. And the other thing that I want to, before I open and invite your questions, is that to remember our always beloved Antonio Carlos Jobim, who said that Brazil is not for beginners. Here we have again another demonstration of that. It's very difficult to predict. My own 5 cents is that I think we have, with an economy growing by mid-year next year, with people seeing justice being done somehow, I think that our negotiating soul will make us go towards the center. Instead of have the polarizing scenario, we are going to have the dispersion, but with people emerging at the center, Meirelles or Alckmin or Doria. One thing, and you are already invited, because in January we are going to have a major conference here on the election, led by Fernando Limonge, who are probably the foremost expert in Brazil today in political parties, political coalitions. He will be a resident scholar here starting in December, and we will have, Limonge believes that Doria, that you do not run for president in Brazil without a party structure because of the size of the country, the complexity of this, and he believes that Doria will, that's what he has been telegraphing, is that Doria eventually will probably will run for governor of São Paulo, supporting an Alckmin, and that way you could develop a centrist solution, etc. I don't know. We come back in January because we will solve that that issue there. We will discuss that. With that, unless Percio, you want to make an observation, or
Very, very quick observation.
then we will.
I obviously share your concern, Sergio, about what's going on in Brazil, and you clearly put the thing in right terms. There's this anti-politician feeling, right? It's like all politicians are corrupt, they don't want to go. That may either reflect itself by people not voting, is your point, or people voting for someone who is not a politician, right? And someone who is going to saying, you know, I'm going to save the country because I'm not a politician, right, or not associated with parties, etc. No wonder Doria says all the time, I'm not a politician. Well, of course he is, but he say he's a technocrat because that improves his image. Right? But markets are perhaps less naive than we look like. No one expects a candidate to say, you know what, I like Temer policies and I'll continue the reforms undertaken by Temer. That's suicide, political suicide. You cannot like someone with such a low levels of popularity. But if he says in small circles that, you know what, I'm going to continue, I'm going to do reforms, that's enough. In that sense, let's say Luciano Huck, for instance, caused much less alarm than you would expect. Because people say, well, you know what? He's a sensible guy. He's not a populist. He will not do crazy things. So actually, there is the name is unknown, but there's from the viewpoint of what he would do actually when he's in power. But no one is going to think that he's going to revert the trend, so to say, right? Bolsonaro, who knows what Bolsonaro thinks, right? But people look at him and say, you know what? At least he's from the extreme right, right? Which would be much better than extreme left, right? So in that sense, from Market's viewpoint, even Bolsonaro, they'll say, you know what? Who knows? But the way it's perceived, and I'm talking about how the way it's perceived by Markets, not the reality, is Bolsonaro is such an outsider with no party machine supporting him. And this election, different from, let's say, the 1989 election, where the natural candidates actually performed very badly, right? And the outsiders, Collor and Lula, actually surprised. This election with party coalitions. Right? You are electing the president, yes, but 2/3 of the Senate, governors, state assemblies, the Chamber of Deputies. In that sense, if an outsider comes to a state and he's the governor, the candidate for the governor of the state associated with him has little popularity, the candidate of the Senate from the state has little popularity, etc., it's very hard for him to penetrate. That's the analysis, at least, right? So Marx tend to discount, so to say, at a very high rate, the real possibility of an outsider getting there. Right? If this was a kind of isolated election, just for president, nothing else, then with social media today, then the chance of an outsider would be much better. Right? But that's the perception. Right? So.
Okay. Now, I would like to offer the first question to our dear friend Fernanda de Negri. She is the director of innovation at Institute of Applied Economic Research in Brasilia. It's a federal think tank of highest quality, and she has been working with us on our innovation initiative, producing a report on our 7th innovation mission that took place at MIT in April. Fernanda, the floor is yours.
I agree with Percio. Percio told that our populism in Latin America is collapsing, and not only Brazil, but all Latin America. But what's the new thing that you see coming up? I explain myself. The liberal agenda was already there. We probably should have implemented this liberal agenda before, but we haven't. Since we haven't do that, the fact that we have not implemented this agenda doesn't mean that it's a new agenda. This agenda was already there a long time ago. And the worst, in my point of view, that the candidates that today represents the liberal agenda in Brazil are very conservative in terms of individual freedoms and so on. So I think what would be new in Brazilian history would be the emergence of a true liberal force, you know, the true liberals. Where are the true liberals in Brazil? It's difficult to find them. I don't know. Well, the question is, what is this new that you are seeing? And Sergio, what do you think about what is the sustainability of this agenda? I agree with Percio. We have to implement a lot of liberal reforms in terms of, especially social security reform. There are a lot of things to do that we haven't done before. My concern is that I think there is no hegemony in the country. You know, we don't have it's not a consensus, but a hegemony, in fact, to sustain this kind of agenda. So I'm afraid that these reforms that are being implemented today will not be sustainable in the future election because, well.
Okay, I failed to say also that Fernanda is currently visiting scholar at MIT, your old school. So go ahead, Perso, if you want to respond.
Well, liberalism has a number of different meanings, and it's a very rich intellectual tradition. What and but let me say basically one thing is what's called the Washington Consensus that was baptized by the left as neoliberalism, that basically doing economic pro-market reforms. That's one thing. Right? You are talking about opening up the economy, privatization, fiscal responsibilities, etc. Nothing wrong about this agenda. It's as needed today as it was needed 20 years ago. The critical sense is actually to get beyond this liberal agenda. In that sense, not the new liberal, but the antique liberalism, so to say. English liberalism is much better. So if you take John Stuart Mill defended the universal base income, saying that in order for citizens to be able to exert the citizenship, the state should provide that's basically the Bolsa Familia, the family income support, right? That's in John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill defended the right of women to vote, right? Because critical to the traditional liberalism is not income equality or income inequality, it's the equality of opportunities, right? So we should allow, that's his argument, should allow women to vote to ensure that all citizens have equal opportunities to manifest themselves. So there's an agenda of, let's say, of the English liberalism of 19th century that I think if it could be, that would actually be needed. And so a good politician would be smart enough to go beyond this so-called Washington Consensus, right? Will we have this politician that would say, you know what, I'm going to privatize everything, I'm going to open up radically the economy, but I'm going to invest more in basic education, more in wealth, in health. I'm going to invest in public health, right? More in social, let's say, in police equipment, so on and so forth. So actually, you need to talk about economic liberal reforms, but also you need to talk about a better management of government. Right? It's surprising. If you look in Brazil, for instance, digital government, right? There's no one that talks about digital government in Brazil. Just give a simple example. The UK government obviously knows better than others, but UK government today has the same number of public servants as you had in 1930. 40% less people they had 10 years ago. Right? It's the most digital advanced economy from the viewpoint of the working of the public sector of the big economies in the world. You can do fantastic, dramatic change in public sector management if you manage well. Right? So a good agenda is not only a good agenda of reforms, but a good agenda is, listen, I'll make government more efficient, more responsive to people. I'll invest more in education, in health, public health. That's basically the old agenda of liberalism. Right? In that sense, whether the existing candidates subscribe to that agenda or not is not clear. Right? But I think if they don't, they will be hard to win the election. Simple as that.
Well, about the sustainable or the popular backing to this agenda. Or lack thereof, right? If you believe in the polls, more than 70% of the Brazilian population is against reform of the pension system. In this respect, Temer's administration has been a lousy communicator of the benefits of the. So it won't be easy for any candidate to sell this in the market, in the electoral market. It will be self-defeating. there will be no space in the election to put forth proposals in this respect. So it won't be easy for any candidate elected for next presidential term to advance with social or pension reforms. Although I agree that if you, within the economic and the political elite, there is a greater level of awareness about the inevitability of doing some kind of reform, and how radical or how shallow this will be, it remains to be seen. But clearly, the liberal agenda has has no strong backing in the electorate, and I'm kind of uneasy with this, with the fact that, I'm not conflating Percio and the market, but the market is obsessed with economic liberal reforms. If the price of doing economic liberal reform is to give a damn to human rights and the environment, so be it. And I find this horrible. I mean, I find this despicable. And I really, I mean, and Bolsonaro is not someone that I can simply discount. I mean, you were in jail. My father was in jail. This is a guy who praised a well-known officer who was directly involved. So don't
In torture.
I'm not
Say
cynical enough.
Directly involved in
Right?
torture.
Come on. It's not only economics that matter if you're thinking about what kind of society you want to live in, right?
Seriously, I'm far from saying that. I mean, just
You slightly said
No, no,
something
no, no, no.
similar.
No.
You're
What-
very sophisticated,
no,
Percio,
no, no,
but
no,
you,
no, 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 no.
You,
What-
you
what-
came close to saying that.
No, I didn't. Basically, what I'm saying is the following. Market reactions, which are key because that's where we are talking about movements of capital, etc. They're always myopic in any country. Financial markets, entrepreneurs look for the well-being of their companies, and basically that's what they are there for. Right? So don't expect financial markets to have great opinions on human rights, extending basic education, improving education to the very poor, etc. It's not their job, right? They just look at, you know
But
what?
it's your job, my friend.
No, but it's different. The point's the following. Financial markets basically look at situations and say, you know what? Is the country going to grow more or less? Is this reform good, pro-market or not? So it's a very, very myopic and stopic view, right? The challenge of Brazil is another one, is to implement, let's say, liberal reforms in this economic sense, but also to move to another agenda. You have an agenda of human rights, you have an agenda for better government, you have an agenda of investing heavily in education, you have an agenda of coping with the very fast pattern of technological change that's happening in the world. You have an agenda of actually expanding social benefits because unemployment is a rising trend all over the world because of technology. It will happen in Brazil. You have today for extremely high unemployment rates. They're going to decline if you have a economic recovery. Yes, we'll never get back to what it was. Never, because of the very fast technological change. There's another agenda that markets don't care about. And as a citizen, I would obviously subscribe to the other agenda. But my point is the following, that for the feel-good factor next year, in the sense of, you know what, the economy is recovering, I may be unemployment, you're unemployment, but I know someone who got a job, right? This feel-good factor will be there. Will be there.
Better than now, right?
Yeah, better than now. No shot. No, I have
doubts about it, yeah.
no doubts about it. The real question is the following: is the feel-good factor good enough for to elect, let's say, someone who is a good president from the strictly economic viewpoint? If it is, fine. If it's not, what will happen is a very sharp deterioration of expectations and a dramatic reverse of what we have had. So there is risk of a dramatic reversal. Bolsonaro is a strange case because if you talk to people, in financial markets, they'll never say they like Bolsonaro. But in private conversation, you hear more and more because you know what? The guy's from the right, so he cannot do bad things, which is horrifying thinking. But markets tend to be myopic everywhere. Right? And the key thing is that if it looks like we are going to be electing someone who is not liberal in the economic, strictly sense, then you're going to have changing expectations for the worst, and then the economy will derail very fast. That's the scenario that say markets are ignoring.
I will invite three people to ask questions. Please be very brief in our questions because we are running out of time already. And in a moment, I will leave here because there are some people waiting. And Anya, the associate of our program, will come here and will conduct the rest of manage the debate. So, Ricardo, Santiago, Peter, and Steve, please ask your question. Ricardo, you start. There.
Who gets? He gets first.
Yes, Ricardo Santiago goes first.
You're first.
Beauty before age.
Is this on? Yeah.
Yes, brief questions.
Let me just. Can I ask two small questions, simple ones? First, on the question of the election coming up in 2018. The first round focused on personalities of people. In other words, they listed a number of people and who would win among those. And we began to discuss a little bit what the agenda is when we got into the questions. And what I wanted to wonder from Carlos Eduardo didn't want to predict who the next president would be. But I'm wondering if him and Sergio could talk about what are the key issues how are they going to frame the issues in the debate? Not the agenda, what Percio has, what the agenda should be. But the question is, that's not how the issues are framed in a debate. You know, immigration issue is framed as a wall. Trade issue is framed as ripping up what is the issues and how are they going to be framed? How is the campaign going to be waged? Under what in other words, I think that may be as important as the personalities. And we haven't. Secondly, just for Percio, how much does Brazil's recovery depend on external, the well-being of the global economic community, its neighbors like Argentina and the rest of Latin America, the U.S.? In other words, how much does it depend on others?
Well, I think the issues will be the reforms, will be corruption, will be the economy, will be mostly that, I think. I think these will be the three main issues. The problem is that, for instance, corruption, all the parties are involved in it. The reforms, no one will defend the reforms. The economy, that is the only issue that has a clear group that may profit from it, is the center group, and especially the candidate, if Meirelles is the candidate closer to the government. But I don't see any other issues. I don't know if Sergio sees any other issue that can galvanize the population except this.
Security.
I think,
Security, yeah, sure.
yeah, corruption, public safety,
Yeah,
and
security,
the
safety.
economy, and of course, with the economy recovery picking up, I think that sort of mitigates the weight that the moral discussion around corruption would have. So it's good news for people who are closer to the establishment, right? But not to the point of erasing corruption as one of the central issues of electoral race.
Well, on the question of how much Brazil depends, I think much more than people think. Basically, To grow, you need to invest. Right? Saving rates are very low in Brazil, first of all. Companies have, you can look at financial statements of companies that deteriorated dramatically. If you look at free cash flow, EBITDA margins, everything has deteriorated because we have had a very severe crisis and that was aggravated by very high interest rates. So simply put, we need foreign direct investment and foreign investment in liquid markets as well. Right? So a dramatic reverse of that will certainly complicate the situation in Brazil tremendously first. And basically what I'm saying is recovery is going to happen and sustainable growth is going to happen 2018 onwards, provided that you have a good president, domestically and international markets continue to be very favorable.
And if you want to go?
Yes. Very briefly. In addition to the fact that the economy, as perceived by the markets, not going to be perceived by the population as a whole, even the unemployment declines a little bit, there's the issue also that we cannot imagine that Alckmin or Doria is going to be representing for the population as a whole the ones that did the economic recovery. The government does not have a candidate in this election. The only possible one that would be successful in sharing the view of the bright side of the government, which is the economy, is Meirelles. If Meirelles is in the running, then the issue of the economy and the recovery is going to be a major issue in his favor. But I doubt that other from the high end of the population, high income, they are not going to perceive it, Doria and Alckmin as doing that. A second question is on the names. It surprised me, Carlos, that you didn't mention Marina and Ciro. And it's interesting because in the left, allow me to call those from the left, it's an exaggeration, but let's put it this way. The issue is going to be on the 30% vote of the PT, which can go to someone like Jacques Wagner or Haddad, but also can be earned by a discourse from the left, which these two at least are the ones in the scenario now outside of PT that could bring that. So I would invite you to comment on
It was a mistake of mine. If you see my notes, populism, Ciro, Marina. I just forgot to mention. I think that Ciro is maybe the most dangerous possible candidate we have. Even more dangerous than Bolsonaro, forgive me, because I think he is as crazy as possible. He can do anything from the best to the worst. So my biggest fear is Ciro, but I don't think he has any chance. And Marina, I think she had her chance last election. I don't think she is able to go as well as she did in the last election because she seems to be very ill, more than ever. She is a person who has health problems, very serious health problems. Second, she was not able to form her party, and her party was a failure in the municipal elections. Third, she has been absent of the public debate. Once in a while, you see her name appearing. She never gives opinions. She never appears in the debate. So she has been very absent. So I don't see many chances on her, despite the fact that I like her very much. And I will ask to be excused because I have another appointment in a couple of minutes. And thank you very much for having shared the table with two great intellectuals as these two who are here. Thank you.
Would you like to comment on Marina?
Well, I worked with Ciro for a while because he was, he was the finance minister that actually took over after Recupero left with 6 months. So I just tell you that this was not a good experience. No, definitely not. Definitely not. Definitely not.
But I mean, I think we cannot rule out any possibility. It will be extremely competitive, and in terms of the electoral supply, dispersed election. So we cannot rule out the possibility that Ciro will inherit a significant chunk of Lula's votes, especially because he is also well rooted in, or better rooted than in other regions, in the northeastern region. So there is a certain overlap. Who knows? It's hard to say. I find it funny that markets consider Meirelles as a competitive candidate based on the fact that, or the assumption that he will benefit from the recovery of the economy. Well, this is at the most, it's just half of the truth. I mean, consider other facts. He's a banker. He was closely linked to JBS, and he's a node guy. So these are factors that you have to consider, and markets tend to think, oh, this is not important. He will benefit because he is. He plays a protagonist role in the economic team. I think this sort of reasoning does not take us very far in terms of predicting the prevalent electoral trends.
Right, next question? Yes.
Sure. Steve
If
Kaplan.
you could grab the mic,
Oh,
please.
sure, no problem. Steve Kaplan. I'm a professor at George Washington University, as well as a current fellow here. My question would be, is a centrist in Brazil today, right? We have this one of the prevailing views is a centrist will emerge. We've talked a lot about the campaign, but I'm thinking in terms of governing post-campaign. Is a centrist in Brazil today the same as a centrist a decade ago or 2 decades ago? I'm thinking of sort of the two kind of perspectives that we've heard around the table today. One being there's a lot of pressures from the market, right, to mitigate the state on some level. And then on the other side, there's a lot of anger and resentment and demands for greater accountability and social responsiveness from a state. How does a centrist reconcile these two forces?
Would you like to go first?
You go first.
All right. I think the center can be, or sort of compressed, or pulled in two different dimensions. One is socioeconomic dimension. I think you have a bigger than before demand for last state, sort of liberal agenda, has sort of filtered down to other walks of society. It's not just something which is dear to the economic elite. On the other hand, Brazil is still a very unequal country with a lot of pent-up social demand. So the center has to reconcile these two things. Brazil is not UK. A Thatcherist kind of liberalism will not pay off politically in Brazil, right? On the other hand, you have the so-called cultural wars, the very American issue, which is now being felt in Brazil. So you have the evangelicals, which account for 20% of the population, but a higher percentage, they are overrepresented in Congress. So the center has to deal with, let's say, a liberal agenda, liberal in the American sense, in a moral conservative kind of agenda. And to add a third dimension, which is in a way linked to the other for various channels, is where you put the emphasis, whether on the environment, on development, and the agribusiness sector, which is very much pro-business, tends to adhere to the liberal agenda. It is very active in putting pressure against environmental protection. So the center has to reconcile this opposite forces, and it's not an easy task, given the fact that any president is elected without a homogeneous base in Congress to back his or her agenda. So it's one of the predicaments of the kind of political system that we have in Brazil.
It's a very difficult question to answer. I put a lot of emphasis on market expectations because market expectations dictate what will happen to employment. Right? So basically, if you look at employment in Brazil, you have actually a dual economy. Right? Public servants, employment rate is obviously the very same one because they have stability, and real wages have been increasing. Right? If you look at the private sector, all unemployed people come from the private sector, right? And average real wages are coming down. Right? So you actually have, even if you talk about employment, you have a kind of more complex picture than you would like. The overall rate of unemployment that looks absurdly high is even higher because the burden, 100% of the burden of adjustment felt on the private sector. Right? But the fact is you have two different, let's say, audiences from the viewpoint of employment. One is not that worried, the other one is worried. But if you talk about stability of public servants, then you're going to raise a problem for the substantial part of your voters because they are public servants. But the markets are very myopic. They're interested in reforms that make the economy more efficient, more market-oriented, etc. And I think that in that particular sense, you have the economic elite, you have financial markets, you have international investors, and surprisingly, evangelics as well. Right? Evangelics have been pro-market strongly. Right? But when you come to an agendas more complex like the environment or abortion, there are a number of topics that actually it is hard to find exactly because the guys may be pro-markets against abortion, maybe pro-markets against and don't care about environmental laws. So actually, how to position yourself as a candidate is very tricky and very difficult. One thing for me is clear. If you don't talk about more employment, you're not going to win. Mm-hmm. If you don't talk about more basic education for the poor, you're not going to win. You have to talk about health and security. Right? Reforms, you don't need to talk about. Right? Because markets will form their opinions and markets don't vote, basically, right? So, but that's important because if the candidate's perceived as someone who is not liberal in that Washington consensus sense, then expectations will revert, and you have unemployment going up in the midst of the election, which is bad. But there is a difference between markets want, what the country wants. The country wants a liberal agenda in the old English sense, not in the new Washington consensus sense, and how the candidates are going to position themselves. My opinion is better avoid questions like abortions, questions like environment.
Third rail.
Yeah, better avoid and talk about employment. That's something good. Better avoid the topic of stability of public servants. If you talk about Social Security reform, it's a misnomer, actually. Right? Basically, what you are talking about is just cutting the privilege of the public sector employees. It's not a real, because the problem is not in the private sector, it's the public sector. Right? So how to put it? If you say I'm in favor of Social Security reform, that's bad for you, right? If you say I'm against privileges, that's much better way of putting it, right? But how to phrase and how to express it politically is a challenge. That's what politicians are good, right?
And don't forget that the rules of the game are not established yet. They will be established by October 7, right? But there are still pending issues concerning campaign finance, distribution of TV time on TV, and that will affect competition a great deal.
One point that's important is that my question to you: do you think there will be any change in this coalition rule system or not?
Not for this
Yeah,
election. I mean, proportional election. No, I think they have already decided that the end of the coalition to Congress will take place in 2020 and not now.
Yeah, because with coalition rule, existing coalition rules, candidates that are backed by strong party machines have a clear advantage, right? So that's something important to figure in mind. Right?
Great. And I know we're running a bit over. We have more questions, so I'm going to take 2 or 3 more, I think. Joel, did you have one? No? Okay. Giuliano, and then across the way, and then this gentleman in front. And
Yesterday, President Fernando Henrique mentioned how important was cartels brasileiros for the elections in 2002. So, do you think that we really need a new cartels brasileiros or Ponte para o Futuro, a clear letter of intentions from the candidates next year?
and then let's collect one more before we
No,
answer.
now you go first.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I have a quick comment / question. I wonder if you're not
You can just keep it
underestimating
brief.
how the new dynamics of voting choice happens nowadays with, social media, because I don't see a lot of room for a middle ground, because the way issues are framed are really polarized, and maybe we're underestimating how the issue of the Q was framed, which is really strong for a lot of parts of society, versus, the need for protection and so on. So I wonder if we're not underestimating these new dynamics and how strong these issues are framed and how strong this actually shapes the voting dynamics too.
Well, very good point. Politicians still tend to believe that TV time will be more important than the social media. That's why they're so eager to get other parties in their alliances to have more time on TV. But on the other hand, Bolsonaro has grown in the polls based exclusively on a very competent strategy, which is being implemented through the social media. So my guess is that social media will have a greater role than ever in boosting or unfavoring candidates, and also in shaping the political debate, especially among the youth. Right? And this is something that is new. It was important in prior elections, but it will be all the more important now. Your question about a new carta, but to say what exactly, right? Because in those days, we were clear that there was lack of confidence in Lula's macroeconomic agenda. So it was the purpose was clear. What would be the content of a Cartas Brasileiros nowadays? I mean, I can't see that coming, unless Lula is allowed to run. But he will run, I think, in a more left-wing platform, and he will not. I think he will not write a new Carta aos Brasileiros. Right? Yeah.
I didn't mean the same.
But what would be the content? I don't see that coming or playing a role in the. I think that it's going to be an ugly campaign, and with less substance than low blows.
Yeah, but how important is for the markets? To have a
No, they don't care. In that, I fully agree with Sergio. They don't care. No, one thing was Lula, who was satanized and perceived as devil and a dangerous communist that would expropriate assets. In that sense, for him, kind of a letter to Brasileiros, which is actually helped by Odebrecht, we now know. Not but that was something very important to calm down markets, right? And actually, his first his first term, that people sometimes praise, was all about calming down markets, right? The moment he succeeded in winning the hearts of financial markets, actually things started to derail, and he was reelected. That's where things started to derailing, right? Now, so I don't think it's needed. On the question about social media, I think it's going to matter a lot, and it's very hard to understand exactly how is it going to be, right? Some people say that because you tend to interact with your own friends, you have the net effect is going to be just polarization, but not a real game changer, but just have extreme opinions and get a more polarized society, more conflicting society. That effect's for clear. A good candidate should manage well. Right? If you look at what Dori is doing, yes, he's there every day. He's a mayor online, which is something we never had in Brazil. Right?
He has a good fit.
Surprisingly effective. Surprisingly
Very
effective.
good fit. And Alckmin has a remarkably bad performance in social media because he is the quintessence of the old politician, and he doesn't provoke what they call engagement, right? Not very promising, I would say.
All right, our last question here in front. If you could grab the mic, please.
Elcio Santana with Georgetown University. And I just want to bring something. It seems that campaign financing could have an important impact in the next election. I mean, there are new rules, there are new actors. So how do you see, let's say, the role of things like the churches, things like the organized crime, who is slowly entering into that camp, and how would the parties react in an election that does not like politics? I mean, the mood is against the politics.
I think. Would you like to go first?
No.
So you give me more time to think about
no,
it.
please.
Well, it's particularly difficult for all established parties to fight an election where there is a strong anti-establishment sentiment. They have to come up with something new, right? That's why Doria is, theoretically speaking, a more competitive candidate than Geraldo Alckmin. And without depending on probably there will be a fund with public fund with treasury resources to finance the campaign, and this will be distributed according to the seats that parties have, not only in the lower chamber but probably in the Senate. That will favor the larger parties. So I think the perfect formula or combination would be someone new, but backed by a coalition of large parties. The evangelicals will have, let's say, a strong say, but they do not tend to vote homogeneously, right? What you have, you need, any candidate needs to at least pay lip service to, let's say, to family and the sort of thing. It would be like hitting a third rail, saying anything about abortion, being pro-choice or pro-gay gay rights. So any competitive candidate will need to be very cautious and, I would say, conservative in moral terms. So someone new with a savvy in social media and backed by coalition or large large parties. Doria might be that guy, but who knows? It can be, well, it will be greater than before, I think, because but not in the presidential election. Probably in elections to Congress. The more it's a sort of zero sum game, I think. The less you have money from the private sector, and there will be less money from the private sector. And there will be more money from organized crime, because the organized crime there has no reputational risk. So it's very good business. And they have been, it's not uncharted territory to them.
Well, guys, it looks like we have done it again, and I'm sorry I had to, a visitor, and I had to go there, and I'm sure that Anya did a splendid job, but I already thank Carlos Eduardo, thank you, Percio, for being here. I expect that this is going to be one of many, I hope that you will come back to Washington periodically. Sergio knows that we count on his wisdom. Sometimes we bring people that cannot be here. We have the cameras and the internet and the Skype or other things. So, I just wanted to end on something that I was interviewed this week by the Associated Press, because they wanted to understand Brazil regarding this, what you're just talking about, this more conservative positions on what is called here in the United States the cultural issues, which is homosexual rights, which is abortion, etc. And it's very interesting, because I told this very good American journalist in Brazil, say, Brazil is a much more conservative country than it looks. We are a conservative society. It was not by accident that we're the last major country to abolish slavery. We have, at the same time that we had been able to produce social policies, Brazil is a kind of an innovator in many things in social policy. Look at our game, cidadeinjogo.org.br, and you understand what I'm talking about. Yes, we probably are more conservative than we think we are, and than others think we are. But I believe I think Brazil has a practical aspect to it. In that sense, and my friends more to the left hate when I say this, but I will say it again. Brazilians are practical, like in the American sense of the world. The ideological fight in Brazil has sort of some limitation. We don't stay with that for too much. We like, it's sort of whatever works, we support that. And sometimes that is not good. that is the challenge. But thank you very much. Stay tuned. Next, we will have here a few discussions about the economy. And on November the 16th, this is for sure, we'll have here the Director General of the National Petroleum Agency, ANP, to report and analyze the auctions that took place this week and the oil auctions that will take place in the year of 18. Décio Oddone is a former director, career Petrobras, brilliant public servant, now directing ANP, working in tandem with our dear friend who was here recently, Pedro Parente. So stay tuned and keep watching following our work, the internet, and keep asking hard questions on Brazil. And I wanted to talk to thank very much not only Anya, but also our dear interns here for having helped in this event. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Desculpa se eu te dei uma cutucada
Não,
mais
mas fez
forte
bem,
ali
fez bem.
aqui.